When I was 6 months old, I played my first video game, Socom 2. Obviously, being a literal newborn, I was pretty much an expert at the game, and quickly began my journey into discovering all the wonders gaming had to offer. Each member of my family has their own particular taste, and each of us is very different as to which one is our favorite. My mom, for one, loves Super Mario Bros. For the NES and the classic Atari games. Weirdly enough, she also loves Pacman, specifically for the Atari, which bears little resemblance to its cabinet counterpart. My dad has a love-hate relationship with Bethesda games, and will cycle between Fallout 4, 76, Skyrim, and The Elder Scrolls Online. It's also the only games that he has played for the last 10 years. My brother has a wide range of tastes, ranging from Elden Ring to Arma, but his biggest attachment has always been Halo, which he constantly talks about and plays, even the bad ones like Halo Wars. As for me, I'll play just about anything with a story, and I think I've exemplified that on this channel enough as it is. VR has become a growing fascination of mine, as we've also explored, and there are so many games that continue to be cycled throughout my top 10 list. But at the top of that list is a franchise that is as old as I am, and it has remained there for as long as I can remember, Ratchet and Clank. This series of games has been at the forefront of my expectations every time I play a new game, and despite the leaps in technology since 2002, I have yet to find a game that I enjoy more than the ones from this series. But why is that? There's definitely nostalgia playing a part, no doubt about that, but why is it something that I still hold in such high regard? There's plenty of games from my childhood that I fully recognize are dog shit now, but never has this series fallen into that category. So, in an effort to discover what I remember being so magical about this series, and seeing how it's transformed over the years, I want to talk about it. Not all in one video, considering this video is already over 40 minutes long and it's only about one of 15 games. Oh yeah, spoilers, I've got a lot to say about this game, so buckle up. With all that being said, I would like to invite you to perhaps the biggest rabbit hole I'll ever go down, and accompany you throughout this absolute mess of ramblings about a game series from my childhood and its first installment, aptly named Ratchet and Clank. If you're watching this without knowing what Ratchet & Clank is, then you should know that this game is from 2002. Yes, obviously the graphics are dated, but you have to remember that this game released over 20 years ago, on a piece of hardware that released in the year 2000, which is most likely older than most of you. It's older than me. Holy fuck, we're old, goddammit. Existential dread aside, this game is really, really gorgeous. I'm playing the PS3 collection, which you might initially think adds visual enhancements like other remasters, but let me assure you that this collection is a downgrade. But we'll talk about that in some of the later games. Apart from the bump in resolution to 720 and 1080p, the collection is more or less the same as what the game looked like in 2002. Good design is forever in my opinion, and I really do think that this applies here as well. Apart from the limited draw distance and skyboxes of some of these maps, I think that these levels look and feel amazing. One thing I especially appreciate is the variety of color that each environment uses and the unique design of different areas. Ratchet & Clank is a galactic adventure where you encounter different species, groups, and battle threats across a vast galaxy. As a result, each area has its own unique style and attributes that is shockingly rare for games that boast having unique areas to explore. If you were to blur all the worlds in Ratchet & Clank and compare it to almost any other game, you'd probably see what I'm trying to explain here. It's just wonderful that the different worlds in this game actually feel distinct, not just different sections of the same planet. In terms of animations, they are also expertly crafted. Even back in the day, the animations ran at a pretty smooth 60 frames per second, which only serves to embarrass the modern games that have released with thousands of times of the processing power, yet somehow can struggle to reach even 30. Every animation flows smoothly into each other, attacks are distinct, and hitboxes are accurate enough to be able to dodge every attack. I think. I'm not gonna check. At the very least, none of the attacks were bullshit enough that it felt blatantly broken, which is a hell of a lot more than I can say for some other games. Even if attacks are mechanically identical, the visuals carry it to make it seem like the attacks are unique, which I absolutely love. Sound design is also top-notch in this game. All of the weapons, enemies, and environment sounds are well crafted and distinct. Given the unique setting, you're able to discern what's being shot at you, who's around you, and what tools you are using simply by listening to the sound. The music in this game is also just pristine. call me crazy, but I cannot stand the orchestral scores that so many games use over and over and over again for their soundtracks and soundscapes. Do you know how many fucking instruments exist? It has nothing to do with their quality either. Modern OSTs are some of the best music ever composed, but they all feel like they're being made by the same group of people. Imagine if Call of Duty, The Witcher, Warhammer, Elden Ring, Metro, Resident Evil, and Edith Finch were all scored by Nickelback. Even if you like Nickelback, which you shouldn't, you've got to admit that that would get old at some point. This OST does not have that problem. Each track composed fits the level incredibly well and is just as distinct. Rather than overanalyze and get shit wrong, I'm just going to play the OST over some footage of its corresponding planet, and you can decide for yourself. I think we can agree that this is better than Nickelback. There's a definite retro future aesthetic going on, like despite the fact that this technology far surpasses anything beyond our own era, it still has an air of jank to it. These aren't mass-produced, flawless, smooth pieces of technology. It's bolted together, has exposed tubes and wires, and clear signs that these creations aren't top of the line. It's kind of reminiscent of Fallout, where despite the fact that we very much don't have the technology to be making these hulking suits of armor or crazy weapons, it doesn't look like something completely beyond our current abilities. This particular aesthetic is something that's aged better with time, since it feels appropriate considering the hurdles you have to go through to play these older games on their original consoles or systems, compared to playing games nowadays with streaming, gigabit internet, and corporatization to the point where publishers force games down your throat for a crumb of additional revenue. Suffice to say, I like the visual and auditory presentation of this game, and, spoiler alert, this extends to most of the series. Your mileage may vary depending on the types of games you play and what's important to you, but I've always preferred style and substance compared to the constant race for realism. 9 times out of 10, fidelity ages poorly, but good design is forever. Ratchet and Clank is a third-person action-adventure shooter that emphasizes level exploration and movement. Basically, it's perfect. Okay, there's actually a lot to talk about with this game, so let's break it down one by one. Movement in this game is incredibly smooth and simple, which makes traversing and platforming feel great. There's a sense of weight to the movement that feels great for games from this era. I went back to play other platformers like Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, and Sly Cooper, and I've gotta say that Ratchet and Clank really does have the best movement of these games. I'm sure if you're a platforming god who wants the fastest movement possible in these games, that the other ones would probably be better in this regard, but Ratchet and Clank feels the best to me, an absolute casual with no intention of speedrunning in my entire life. Except Ultra Kill, of course. Ratchet moves at a solid pace, has a very high jump, double jump, and once you upgrade Clank later on, you have the option for a lunge, hover, and even more powerful high jump. You're able to wall jump in certain sections, cling onto the sides of walls and railings, and it honestly just feels great. What contributes to this is the fact that the controls are stupid simple. One stick moves Ratchet, one button is a jump, and another button is a modifier on that jump depending on the context. I cannot imagine how much time this must have taken Insomniac to fine-tune everything to this degree, but it was well worth it. This game, the first one in the franchise, has the second best movement in the entire series, with first place going to the direct sequel of this game. I find that whenever I go back to play this game, the platforming sections are some of my favorite moments throughout the whole thing. Some of the more interesting ones, like the sewers in Blackwater City, are only able to be completed once per playthrough, which always stands out as a highlight each time I go back through this area. On top of platforming, there are some sections I'm going to call extracurricular sections, since this is a running trend with the franchise. These sections include grind rail courses, air combat, hacking puzzles, water sections, hoverboard racing, so on and so forth. A lot of these sections are short, offer a much needed respite from the combat and platforming, and are generally good or okay sections. The hoverboard races can be a bit tough since they rely on really precise timing since it's a glorified time trial, but once you get into the rhythm of it, it's not too bad. What is pretty rough no matter which way you cut it is the Clank sections. Given Clank's stature and lack of mobility options on his own, a lot of his sections feel slow and at times clunky, which contrasts Ratchet's movement in a way that feels poor. Clank's sections focus on puzzles, minor platforming, and using disposable robots to fight enemies, another area that contrasts poorly. Spoiler alert for the entire series going forward, almost all of the Clank sections in these games have this problem, and it's going to be a very long time until I have something positive to say about them. However, these are just diversions from the main parts of the game, so let's talk about the combat now. Throughout the game, you will be unlocking and purchasing different weapons throughout your journey, which each have unique properties and applications. You start the game with a bomb glove and a wrench, the former being the most effective either with aiming or sporadic movements, and the latter being an ammo saver or a last resort after a certain point in the game. Your wrench is bound to square and that can never take up a weapon slot. Your other weapons can either be selected from the weapons menu at any time, or a quick select menu of up to 8 weapons and gadgets. There is a total of 15 weapons and 6 gadgets that can be equipped in hand, and an additional 8 items that impact gameplay. 15 weapons might not sound like a whole lot compared to the literal thousands of weapons in other games, but it's worth mentioning that every single weapon in this game is completely different. Some may serve similar purposes like the Visibomb gun and the Devastator for long-range combat, but both guns have unique abilities that make them situationally different. The two weapons that are probably the most similar are the Pyrocitor and the Tesla Claw, since they're both great at crowd control and have a high ammo capacity, but the methods in which they do it make them feel very different to play with. That might also be me trying to cope though, since the Tesla Claw is my favorite weapon from this game. It'd be redundant to go over every weapon in the game, even though I think it could be done fairly quickly, but instead let's just cut to a montage. Sound good? Combat in this game is really fun. The situations you find yourself in are all presented well, and even if it's a similar ambush from one planet to the next, the tools you use throughout that fight make it incredibly distinct and memorable. This might also have to do with the different locales you find yourself in, which while we're on the subject, are surprisingly thorough considering this was a PlayStation 2 game. Obviously not all levels are grandiose and 2-scale planetoids, but levels like Pokitaru and Quartu are wide-sprawling levels with multiple pathways to explore. Many of the best levels in the entire Ratchet and Clank series follow a similar design principle. When arriving at a location, you are given multiple pathways that each lead to their own separate objectives. On the first playthrough, you have no idea what could be lying beyond a doorway. It could be a simple combat section, some platforming that leads you to the next objective, or a completely unique encounter that can end with boss fights, new weapons and equipment, or even new quests entirely that can be completed by traveling to other planets. It borders on being a Metroidvania, but is better for a more linear experience by virtue of the fact that it's little clusters of backtracking. Apart from secrets and a couple aha moments, there isn't a situation where you'll be at the last level of the game returning to the very first level, technically. As much as I like games like Hollow Knight for their sprawling worlds that are deeply interconnected, it does frustrate me on occasion when this tiny corner holds the second half of the entire game and I missed it because I'm belligerently blind. One thing that both games do incredibly well is upgrades. Ratchet & Clank emphasizes modifiers on existing items rather than entire new ones, but with a foundation this solid, it really works for this game. Like I said earlier, your high jump becomes even higher later on. Certain tools help you get more ammo and bolts, and previous concerns are rendered moot with later upgrades. In several sections of the early game, you are practically forbidden from traversing through water, since Ratchet can only hold his breath for so long. However, around the halfway point, you obtain an oxygen mask to allow you to travel into space, but it has the added effect of allowing you to travel underwater indefinitely. I don't want to spoil too much more about this game, so I'll leave it at this. The game's upgrade systems and mechanics help to emphasize each part of the game. Combat and movement are improved so much by the exploration and upgrade systems that by the end you truly feel like you're part of this journey as much as Ratchet and Clank. The direct modifiers that each level has also really adds to making you hone your skills and master each of the different mechanics. By the end of this game, you have the tools and skills to lay waste to entire battalions of troops, tanks, ships, and it doesn't feel out of place like it does in games like Call of Duty. You've traveled the entire galaxy and become more and more powerful each step of the way, and you really feel that by the end. Before we get into story and character discussions, there's one more mechanic I want to talk about, which may be my favorite game mechanic of this entire series: Challenge Mode. More commonly known as New Game Plus nowadays, after the credits roll, you're given the prompt to either return to the game before the final boss fight, or restart the game with all your weapons, bolts, and a good portion of your upgrades on your person. This makes the game feel like an entirely new experience, allowing you to use your knowledge in ways that you would have never thought of in your first playthrough. It's a really compelling system, and dare I say, it's the best New Game Plus system apart from something like the Soul series, which is basically a one-to-one copy. This type of thing really adds to the longevity of a game for me. Not having to start at the absolute beginning to explore and experiment is a godsend, and thankfully every game in this series follows suit, and arguably gets better from here on out. That's all I really have to say about the gameplay. It's really enjoyable, has a solid amount of depth and options, and is a very solid experience even today. The only problem I have with the gameplay is how good the following games improve on it, and the fact that it feels much older than the games that follow. We'll get into that at a later time though, because now we're going to talk about the stories and characters of this game, which means spoilers. As a brief rundown, it's your basic tale of young novice heroes rising to the occasion against a big bad Darth Vader type villain, but there's lots of charm placed into every one of these characters. Our main characters have an arc, are shockingly mature in themes and tone, but also have enough whimsy to not feel inconsistent. It is a fun adventure game, but that doesn't mean that the characters have to be cardboard, and I really appreciate that. I think in terms of narrative and character development, this game is the best of the entire franchise, which to those who have already played the games and knows what comes later on might sound crazy, but again, we'll get there when we get there. If this is where you decide to step away, Ratchet and Clank is available on PS2, if you can find it, PS3 and PS Vita as part of the Ratchet and Clank collection, and you can play it through PlayStation Plus Premium via game streaming. If you have the bandwidth for it, it runs surprisingly well, but honestly the collection for PS3 is going to be your best bet, unless you're an absolute purist. Not to say that this is the best way to experience the series, but considering the current state of the series, it's definitely the easiest way to get into it. For those of you who are leaving, I hope you enjoy this series as much as I do, and for those of you who are staying, let's get into it. Our story begins with a mechanic working on his ship in the middle of a desert planet. He seems to be pretty far into the creation of his ship, but before he can actually finish, his virtual assistant informs him that the final step is to attach a robotic ignition system, which the mechanic apparently doesn't have. As he sulks, the camera pans to the stars above, where we meet our other protagonist. In a robot production facility several planets away, a defect was created and spat out from the conveyor belt. After convening with another robot who informs him of something mischievous, the defect escapes from the planet with other robots on his tail, following him into space. After a quick dogfight, the defect ship is knocked out of the sky, plummeting into that desert planet we spoke of earlier. We cut back to our mechanic, who sees the ship crash into a nearby rock formation, and through curiosity, hope, or maybe even simply boredom, he goes off to investigate. The entire introduction of our two characters is 2 minutes, which is skippable, then you're able to get right into gameplay. Brevity is such a rare thing in games, especially nowadays, so the fact that the game actually starts in just 2 minutes is absolutely remarkable. It's not like the cutscene is boring by any means, it's well shot, the sound and music are really solid, and you're building questions that you actually want to be answered. This first planet is Veldin, and it's about as bog standard as tutorials go. A little bit of melee here, a little bit of exploration, a little platforming, and then a little bit of advanced combat that requires you to think about how to approach enemies. We're not going to go over every planet in this section, but I do want to talk about some of the more prominent ones. In my opinion, the Ratchet and Clank games handle tutorials the best in the entire gaming industry. You're allowed to disable help messages from the get-go, but if you need help or want to get used to the controls, you can take your time here. It's calm, short, and incredibly well designed to showcase the basics. Traveling to the crash site, our mechanic finds the remains of a ship and a robot that is in some type of shutdown mode, most likely to preserve itself from the crash. The mechanic takes the robot, most likely to work on it later, and walks off. We transition to a couple hours or even minutes later, and the mechanic is back to working on a ship, most likely trying to find a way to bypass the issue, since, at this point, that's the only thing holding him back from leaving. As he's working on this, the robot comes out of its shutdown mode and begins inspecting the mechanic. Just as a reminder, this robot is fresh off the assembly line, only a couple hours old, if that. He's practically a newborn, and he's more fascinated by everything around him than timid or scared. And this is exemplified by the very first words said by him in the entire series.
Interesting. Yay!
I believe there are 3 things that a story needs to get right to be a great story. The introduction, the rising tension, and the finale. There are people who talk about this topic in far more depth than I could, like Cloud Cuckoo Country, particularly about creating intrigue in the first moments of a story. You've gotten a brief introduction of the characters and gameplay before this point, but this is the point where the narrative and your motivation for the rest of the game comes into play. The word interesting in this context kind of conveys the naivete of our robot friend, something that translates throughout the rest of the game. I wouldn't go as far to say that his reactions and behaviors are childish, but they do possess a similar purity. Subtext is not in his nature. He takes everything at face value, whether that face is real or mechanical. Let's continue with this conversation though. Our mechanic, not having heard a peep from the robot at this point, is understandably startled. The conversation between these two is awkward and uncomfortably realistic for 2 strangers. Our mechanic is understandably put off by the robot, not because he's mechanical, but because he didn't even expect him to be alive. Thankfully, the games don't really get into that idea of consciousness and what is considered alive in this universe, or not alive. It's more so treated like they're just different species, able to cohabitate, but just have their own unique quirks compared to anything below the surface. I hope. The 2 talk for a bit, to which the robot asks about a character hanging on a poster at the mechanic's hangar? Garage, I guess? The mechanic asks why the robot is so interested in the heroic-looking figure, to which the robot shows him an infobot with a recording from someone named Chairman Drek. The recording is a PSA to the entire planet of Novalis that he will be extracting a portion of the entire planet and adding it to a new planet for his race known as the Blarg. The original planet of the Blarg, Orxon, had its atmosphere destroyed due to pollution and rampant overpopulation, and now it is uninhabitable. Science fiction my ass, this is a premonition. The mechanic says that he'd like to help, but his ship won't work because of
The robotic ignition system.
How did you know that?
I, sir, happen to be equipped with the latest in robotic ignition systems. My programming allows me to start any ship I choose.
So the 2 strike a deal. The robot will start his ship in exchange for a ride to Novalis, and right as more ships begin to land to catch the robot, the mechanic agrees.
Deal.
Thus begins the adventures of the mechanic and the robot, and the following scene of them interacting is one of the best in the entire series.
Whoa, this is great! So that's where I've been stuck this whole time.
Please return your appendages to the steering mechanism, sir.
Huh? Oh, right.
Seeing Ratchet's work pay off for the first time is so endearing.
The name's Ratchet.
Pleased to make your acquaintance, sir.
You got a name?
My serial number is V54296.
Oops. I'll just call you Clank for short.
Clank's cautious side comes through while also playing into the comedy of the duo. Ratchet naming Clank because he rattles is kind of stupid, but it's also very in the moment and bonds the 2 even closer, which is important for this intro sequence. This pairs the bond together and confirms to the audience that we're going through this adventure with the both of them, and they are on equal footing, at least for this game. Countering this triumphant moment for our protagonists, we see that Chairman Drek watched the 2 fly off-world and tasks someone to help capture the 2 of them. As the 2 reach Novalis, they hurtle into the hillside, crashing the ship and stranding them on the planet until they can find a way off. And thus, the adventure truly begins. On Nivalis, you travel through a cave network and meet with an unnamed plumber who provides you with an info bot for planet Iridia. Iridia is really only a planet with some things to collect, not much that connects to the overall narrative of the game, but has lots of useful resources for you to pick up, so it's still worth it to come. Back on Nivalis, the other main path leads you to help fend off the invasion and rescue the chairman of Nivalis, to which he rewards you with a ship to replace the one you busted earlier, and provides you information on Metropolis. The infobot depicts Captain Quark doing an advertisement for a local repair shop, which is a heroic figure that was hung up in Ratchet's shop. Since everyone in this galaxy calls him Captain Quark, it implies that at one point he was indeed a hero of some kind. That kind of gets called into question at points, especially in the later entries, but what's undeniable is the fact that he enjoys the money and fame more than anything else. Quark is everywhere in this galaxy. People talk about him non-stop, and yet it's not enough for him. One of the themes that resonates within the original saga of Ratchet and Clank is the idea of good-natured people existing in a commercialized world. The tangibility of a good versus evil story. The people who are good in this world want to help those around them, while those deemed evil are driven by greed and are never satiated. I'm sure some of you who've played the original saga are pointing and shitting at your screen telling me that I'm wrong, but I'll explain when we get there. As for this game, I like that the villain is incredibly one-note. That might sound weird, but the trope of antagonists being sympathetic or secretly deeper than we expected is so trite in my opinion. In a debut story with furries, robots, slugs, and spore creations running around a galaxy blasting each other apart, there needs to be some simplicity here. But that's also not to say that there isn't anything notable about this story. To get back to Quark, his larger-than-life ego would lead you to believe that he's purely in it for the money, and that he'd reject Ratchet and Clank once they finally catch up to him. But plot twist, once the duo catches up to Quark, he reveals that he actually knows about them and about Drek's plan to take over and take apart planets.
Captain Quark?
Was that?
It's Ratchet and Clank, Captain. You know, from the
Oh, yes, I know who you are.
You do?
Yes, and thank the galaxy you found me.
Huh?
There's an awful plot being hatched to destroy our planets.
Ratchet, he knows.
Great. Does that mean we can go hoverboarding now?
My friends, we're all in grave danger, and I believe that together we can put a stop to this madness.
Together? You mean you want our help?
Look, Ratchet, I've been keeping an eye on you. I've never seen anyone with such raw talent. You are a true hero in the making.
Really? You mean I could be famous?
This scene is probably the second best in the game, or honestly it might be the best depending on who you ask. You can tell that the writers behind this game actually gave a shit and didn't phone it in because it looks like a kid's game. In this scene, you have three people with radically different perspectives and goals. Clank, since his inception, has been searching for Quark to deliver the information about Drek, and not only did he accomplish his goal, but Quark knew about it and seemingly wants to help them take down Drek. Ratchet is merely paying back Clank for activating his ship, and is more interested in exploring the surrounding planets and participating in things like hoverboard races and the like. When he delivers Clank to Quark, he's pretty much ready to go his own separate way, but Quark plays into Ratchet's naivete. Quark starts to pamper Ratchet and tells him that he could be a true hero, someone famous who is paraded in the streets. Throughout the first third of the game, Ratchet is incredibly jaded and cynical, and seemingly uninterested with Clank's mission. True to his word though, he helps Clank get to Quark, and that's when Quark manipulates him. Imagine someone as famous and as important as Captain Copernicus Quark, yes that's his full name, looking at you and telling you that he sees potential in you, and that he's seen how talented and impressive you are, and he's asking you for help. It's easy to see how quickly the two fell into his trap, especially since most everyone else they've interacted with thus far has worn their heart on their sleeve, except for Helga. Quark is deceiving the duo almost immediately. While he did hear about Ratchet and Clank beforehand, it was from Drek himself, who similarly tricked Quark into doing his dirty work so he could focus on his plan. Quark was tasked with taking out Ratchet and Clank since they are the only ones who currently pose a threat to Drek's operation, given that they have information about the plan itself. Most people don't really seem to know about Drek's plan thus far, apart from the planets that have already been attacked and are recouping their losses. Therefore, Ratchet and Clank are loose ends that have the ability and information to ruin Drek's operation. So Quark is doing his own schemes to get the two when they just happen to fall into his lap, and then he attempts to snuff them out. Traveling to Quark's hideout, you are put through the absolute ringer in terms of in-universe challenges, all for training. In gameplay, it's actually incredibly fun and utilizes the full gameplay sandbox that you would have access to at this time. It's very evident that no one in the galaxy is actually meant to survive this, but when you do survive and reach the end, Quark is genuinely shocked.
Well, well, you two continue to surprise me. Step into the Ring of Heroes, and I will finally give you what you deserve.
Ratchet, this is no time for you to become cautious. We have reached our goal.
I don't know.
By now, the rose-tinted glasses are starting to fade for Ratchet, but Clank is still fully committed, to the point where Clank pulls Ratchet onto the Ring of Heroes, making them both fall into the cave and into Quark's final trap.
Get off of me, you idiot!
I love it when a plan comes together.
What do you mean?
What do you think he means, genius?
When Quark pulls back the mask, Ratchet is genuinely pissed off, and Clank just looks like he got shot.
But why?
But why? It's really not that difficult to decipher. I'm the official spokesman for Drek's new planet. I can't have you two getting in the way of my comeback.
His worldview is shattering right in front of him, and he sounds like he's on the verge of tears. After the duo put down the beast, a pathway to a hangar opens up, and an infobot depicts another planet being destroyed by Drek and the Blarg. Clank insists that they have to go to the planet to help, and Ratchet just loses it.
Are you serious? That's it! I am out of here! Captain Quark is gonna be sorry he messed with me.
He is beyond pissed off about the betrayal, how Clank is still on his own shit, and he's only focused on exacting revenge on Quark. Clank tries to reason with him, but it does nothing, and instead has to blackmail him into going to the planet in the first place.
How do you start this stupid thing?
Have you forgotten? You need a robotic ignition system. I will start the ship if you agree to help that commando.
So, blackmail is it? Fine. Just shut up and start the ship.
I genuinely love this scene. I love this shakeup for our characters, and I'm so glad that the writers took the chance on this. It's a development that could only really happen in the first game, since this is still their first contact with one another. And it's not half-assed either, like it is in other stories. Ratchet is pissed off for a very, very long time, and he is not afraid to remind Clank of that fact. For the next third of the game, any cutscene with these two has them fighting, bickering, or making snide remarks to each other, which makes the levels where they split up feel so hollow and like you're missing something important. It's important that you feel this disconnect and this shift in our heroes, because this second half is largely gameplay centric. In terms of narrative, you're chasing leads to find Drek and Quark and gathering different tools and upgrades along the way. It still has enjoyable and engaging gameplay, don't get me wrong, but story-wise you're following breadcrumbs until you get to Hoven, wherein you stop another one of Drek's attempts to blow up a planet. Then, an infobot comes out that gives you coordinates to Drek's moonbase outside of their next target planet, which the duo agree to search for their own reasons.
We must get to the moonbase and stop Drek.
No! We have to get to the moonbase to find Quark. If Drek is there, Quark is probably with him.
But Drek is going to destroy that city. We must get to the base.
That's what I said!
No, that is what I said.
Fine!
Fine.
Fine.
As a sort of reversal, the duo concede that Drek and Quark might not be here, but agree to search the base for a faster ship to catch up with them. On the flip side, Drek tasks Quark to clean up the mess, or else he'll back out of the deal the two struck to bring Quark back into the limelight, to which he agrees. Where before Quark was given the duo on a silver platter, now they're on equal footing, and it's time to have a proper showdown with these two. It's just a shame that the boss fight is in space. Space and airship combat isn't the worst thing in this game, it's just a shame that the mechanics aren't entirely fleshed out to make it feel on par with the fights on the ground. The Ratchet ground, I mean. After defeating Quark, the duo walk off towards another ship, and another infobot appears depicting the devastation being brought on by Drek's forces. It's at this point that Ratchet sobers up from his own bloodlust, and this scene plays out.
Yes, I know. It is worse than I expected, too.
Look, maybe you were right. This is a lot bigger than you or me. I was really selfish focusing on Quark.
I fucking love this. There's technically a scene before this point where Ratchet says that he'll help Clank defeat Drek, but it's clear that he'd go after Quark without missing a beat should the opportunity arise. But now on the space station, he's finally the hero that Quark taunted him with, and the one that Clank always knew he was. As if to hammer home the idea that Ratchet is over his selfish ways, the very next planet takes place during a horrible lightning storm, which makes it so Clank cannot traverse alongside Ratchet. Ratchet, on his own, has to fend off Drek's invasion and gather information as to his whereabouts and how to stop him. And this level is an absolute bitch. Not even including the fact that the mobility you're no doubt used to by now is gone, but the levels twist it even further with narrow pathways, fans, and ice paths, and a magnitude of enemies that is not easily dispatched or avoided. You feel this decrease in power with Ratchet, yet you push forward because you know it's what you have to do. Saving the world isn't easy, but through willpower and using the tools at your disposal, you will persevere. It's also at this point where Ratchet gains some closure on his vendetta against Quark. On a random structure in the middle of the storm, you find Quark attempting to sell some products at a crummy Gadgetron stand.
Captain Quark!
Where?
Come on, Quark, I know it's you.
The name's Steve. Pleased to meet you.
He's so embarrassed that he gives himself a fake name despite the fact that no one else is here and it couldn't be anyone else but Quark. Ratchet's not even mad. He seems more pitying than anything else. After this point, your goal is to gain more power and take the fight to Drek himself. You gain a new upgrade for Clank, one that's used twice in this game, get a couple bits and bobs for Ratchet, and then infiltrate the production facility which created Clank. Fighting to the core of the facility, you speak to a computer terminal which is apparently the heart of the assembly line, in more ways than one. After Clank speaks to his mother, an infobot comes out to reveal that Drek's planet is complete, and the only thing left in his way is finding the proper orbit, which happens to be Veldin, Ratchet's home planet. As per usual, Drek's plan isn't subtle whatsoever, and he plans to use a device to blow the entire planet to smithereens. Once more, Ratchet is absolutely pissed.
Ratchet, are you all right?
He is going to pay!
Excuse me?
It shouldn't have taken me this long to see it! Drek is going to find out what happens when you mess with my home! What are you smiling at?
This is the Ratchet I always knew was there.
The two set off to finish things once and for all, first by finding where Drek and the device is, then taking the fight straight out to Veldin. I will say that Gorda City in the absence of Clank is the most difficult level in this game, but Veldin is certainly the most imposing. Remembering your first stroll through the level all the way back at the beginning is unavoidable as missiles, rockets, electric bolts, and bullets fly past you as you engage in a full frontal assault, the duo versus an entire army. You have to utilize absolutely everything here. Every tool in your arsenal, every weapon you've gathered up to this point, and every strategy and upgrade you've gathered until you are face to face with Drek himself. After some posturing and fighting with Big Clank, Drek shrinks him down to normal size, then runs off to the device. Clank, in his naivete and good-hearted nature, tries to reason with Drek one last time, to which Drek reveals his true plan.
There must be another way to make a home for your people.
You think that's what this is about? Who do you think polluted our last world? I did. This is about one thing and one thing only. Cash, and lots of it.
Drek was pure evil the whole time. Quark and Drek exist on two ends of the villain spectrum in my opinion. Quark is your more modern type of villain, one that you can empathize with and exists as a character alongside a protagonist as opposed to an overarching antagonist. And that's the biggest thing that I think separates him from Drek. The fact that he does have an arc and more going on than pure villainy, which I guess would make him an antagonist, not a villain. Drek is a villain through and through. His goals are not pure, his persona is a lie that he uses to manipulate others, and he cares not for his stranded people, nor those who he's slaughtering by the millions on other planets. Conquering Quark wasn't heralded as triumphant, because he wasn't the true villain of the story. Defeating Drek feels impactful because it is impactful. It's the true tale of good battling evil and winning, which is why I wish the fight was a tiny bit better. It's not the worst fight, I definitely think the fight with Quark in space is the weakest of the bunch, but the arena is so incredibly generic. You're either chasing Drek trying to kill him with a close range weapon, or he's chasing you until you get to a grind rail strip where he just stops. I will say that the hectic nature of this fight is incredibly fun, especially in the later stages. I just think that having some more platforming in this fight would have helped the fight feel less monotonous. If this is your first time playing it, you'll probably have a good time with the fight. But I've played this game for over 20 years, so it's just step and repeat to me at this point. Maybe that's not criticism I should be laying at the game, but, you know, this is how it is. My video, my rules. After besting Drek, the device rotates to point to Drek's new planet, to which he's just now ended up on to avoid being crushed. The activation button reveals itself, to which the two agree without speaking about it whatsoever to use the device and destroy Drek's planet. This is horribly irresponsible. Not only because destroying planet is and should be a no-no, but this also has the potential to horribly devastate nearby planets, which it does, and the duo almost die after an asteroid hits the device. However, Drek does somewhat imply that there seems to be a mysterious benefactor funding Drek's operation.
You see, I've been paid for every square inch of my new world. Once the inhabitants move in, I will begin polluting this world as well. Then the whole thing starts all over again.
So maybe it is for the best, but I don't know, it's just a little too gray for me. Anyways, Clank rescues Ratchet at the very last minute, his arm is damaged, and the game does a fake out by making you think that they are splitting up like the Backstreet Boys. But no, they're bonded for life now. Unlike the Backstreet Boys.
Hey, Tin Can! Where do you think you're going? We, still need to fix that arm.
I did say that this game was a cut above the rest, but that doesn't mean that there's some bombastic, crazy ending that comes out of left field. Unless you consider the commercial and ending, which... ugh. I really like this story. This self-contained, simple, and fully wrapped up story. There's a definite trend I've noticed of games, movies, shows, and literally every form of media needing to leave questions unanswered to force a studio to make a sequel. At this point, it is exhausting not being able to step away from a completed story and feeling satisfied. Don't get me wrong, there are some things I'm desperately hoping get a sequel, but there are so many more that could and should end in one installment. I'm obviously grateful that this series got the chance to expand, but the fact that the foundation for this series going forward is also self-contained is just a cherry on top for me. Ratchet and Clank is a game I appreciate more as time goes on. Back when I was bad at video games, I didn't like this one whatsoever. It is easily the most difficult of the original saga, and probably the most difficult of the entire series, at least in terms of being purposefully difficult. But coming back to it time and time again, it's climbed to be my second favorite of the entire series. The movement is phenomenal, the platforming and combat are wonderful foundations and fully explored within this single game, and the story has retroactively become my favorite of them all. I've come to the conclusion throughout writing and making this first video that my opinions on these games are going to be wild. There's going to be conflicting statements, things that won't make sense if you haven't played the games, and some that won't make sense even if you have. So before we get into the insanity of the following series, I want to make one thing crystal clear. I love Ratchet and Clank. This is my childhood, my upbringing, and something that I only appreciate more going into my adulthood. I would not be who I am today if the series didn't exist. With all that being said, any comment going forward is not from someone who's trying to view this game analytically and objectively and ruin your childhood in the process by using a modern lens. Bullshit. Lots of the issues I have moving forward are either formed during my childhood or retrospectively, which will either make sense or confuse you more, depending on your experience with this game and series. I can't justify the complaints I have against these games, because some of them are just a part of my upbringing and my own experience with them. So believe me when I say that I love Ratchet and Clank, but I am not afraid to talk about the things I don't love about this franchise. This game, however, this is a certified masterpiece.